I bet on basketball just to see the role it's playing in our current culture.
Yes,
Pretty crazy.
it is crazy. I mean, and before we dive too deep on it, you just say your name and your business and what you do, and I'd love to just explore those topics a little bit more.
Sure, my name is Akil Augustine, and I do my best. But professionally, I do a couple of different things. I work for NBA TV Canada as a journalist. I work for the Toronto Raptors as a host. I work with, well, we don't know, but I used to work with Nike in terms of a lot of brand ambassadorship. I think things have changed for Nike tremendously during this pandemic. And I am running, or we'll see. Again, pandemic changes a lot of things, but
Yes.
I do have an outreach initiative called the Mind Club, where the intention is to start a couple of pilot programs within the city to teach young people mindfulness more so than
Mm,
meditation. So a lot of
okay.
breath work stuff. And I do a lot of public speaking with the school boards, Catholic, public, private, doesn't really matter. Just,
Yep.
get in front of some kids. And
Nice.
also the Hoop Factory, Northern Kings AAU,
Yes.
basketball. So we try to stay busy.
Right. Okay. So you just man, you know how hard I'm trying to fight the West Indian stereotype of just having seven jobs because like it's all over that.
Yeah, 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 it is, and part of it too is just in this current economy, you can't just do one thing and live the lifestyle that you like. So you really got to pick and choose your battles and work at
Yeah.
things you love.
Well, yeah, and but what about the whole notion of just dialing deep, like diving deep on one thing or two things? Like, what's your thoughts on that? Because I know I have a ton of hustles as well. Like, so, this is we're in the same boat here, but there's something to be said for just diving deep on one thing as opposed to diving deep on seven things. Like, what's your thoughts on that when it comes to flowing with our passions, basically?
Well, I think Jordan Peterson said this little anecdote that really resonates with me when it comes to this. And it's like, well, some people look at a plumber and say, "Oh, it's just a plumber," right? But I mean, you think about it, like in order to become a plumber, you have to say, first off, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm going to go to plumbing school. So you have
Right.
to dedicate yourself to plumbing school. And then when you go through that like pinhole that is becoming a plumber, because it's just one singular thing, by becoming a great plumber, if you aspire to be a great plumber, you're not just a plumber anymore once you pass through that hole. Now you're an employer, you're a father, you're a cornerstone of the community. Like by becoming a plumber, you become so much more. And I think for
Yes.
me, the way I look at like picking a task or picking anything is like Michael Jordan has become a great businessman, a social influence now later in his career as opposed to younger in his career, and a lot of different things. But he did it by going through that pinhole of becoming the best basketball player he was. I think a lot
Right.
of times in life, like we're presented with skills that we can easily adopt and kind of take to the next level. And so
Yes.
you just gotta take what you're handed. Like I was handed a big mouth. Michael Jordan was handed like a 50-inch vertical.
Right.
Like everybody's handed something different. I think you can take that thing that you're handed and you can like take that to the peak of its possibility, and through that you'll become so much more. Like
Yes.
you're probably a doctor, whatever, but you're a father. You're a businessman. You're the
Yes.
guy that helps out on Sundays at the church or whatever it is, right? So I think
Right.
picking one thing is really key because it allows you to like kind of discover a path, whereas picking everything is this like vague amorphous blog of blah blah. I got to do this, that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So what was the first thing that you chose to make that pinhole for you to branch out
Well,
into everything else?
talking, man. I'm super talkative. Like I talk way too much, and I always tell this story when I'm talking to kids. I'm like, so in elementary school and high school, there were two messages that were clearly given to me by the teachers.
Yes.
One, I talked too much. Two, I was way more concerned with basketball than with schoolwork.
Mm.
So, and I always flip it on the kids like this. I go, well, guys, what do I do for a living? Shut up, Kathleen. I talk about basketball,
Eh,
right? So it's like,
right.
so for me, it's a matter of everybody does something inherently, and I think the internet's a cool way for us to discover this. Like we all I
Your
let her
peeps
hide
around.
your
Yeah, yeah.
baby. Sorry, some of my friends are chiming in, but
That's good, man.
um, just like we all have an inherent skill set that we're given, and if we can just take that to its limit,
Hmm.
then you're gonna find where it will take you next. And I think
Yes.
like the internet for the young kids now. I think for our generation, we look at the internet, well, oh, you're playing video games, or even our parents' generation, oh, you're doing makeup, oh, you're making TikToks and vines. Like some of it's flimsy for sure, but that's just a product of our culture. But for a lot of people, they're finding their voice, and they're becoming more things out
Yes.
of that. Right? There's some people like
Right.
Aubrey Marcus that I follow, Tim Ferriss that I follow. They embrace social media, but then they become these huge voices like Joe Rogan. Like you can just become so much off of just feeding your interests.
Right. Exactly. And there's something to be said for someone channeling that superpower, though, too, right? Because I mean, how do you discover that? Like, you mean, like, how do you draw that thread from a teacher telling you talk too much to you now being a host for NBA TV, right? Like, Canada.
Yeah, well, I think part of it too is finding value in what you do yourself, right? I think one of the big things for me was I had two cousins and a sister, and so when I went home, I would crack jokes all day, and they loved it. And so to me, it
Yes.
was like, okay, all right, there's value in this. And so I think
Yes.
um, part of it is like us as like friends and peers and parents, we need to like find value in the things that the people around us do so they can find value in it, right? I was very
Yes.
fortunate that like I grew up in a neighborhood where everybody was a high level basketball player.
Mhm.
So like I could stand on the side of the court and talk shit and my guys would kill and then everybody be like, yo, that guy's he was right. And then all of a sudden, like, someone invites me to a basketball tournament to get on the mic, and then
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
hears me at that, and they ask me to do a show. And that's kind of how the evolution happens, right? So I
Right.
think like we all need to encourage like Vidal Messiah, one of my best friends in the world. I wouldn't be here without him because he constantly encouraged me. He's like, bring your camera to my games. Come on.
Hmm.
My cousin
Hmm.
Sean is like, you'll come work the mic at these games. So it's like, I think we need to encourage people when we see them in their bag. Like when
Yes.
you see someone kind of forgetting everything around them, really enjoying, even if it's not
Yes.
something that's going to turn into a lot of money, I think you should
Nope.
just encourage them because it worked out for me in the end.
Right, right, right. Two things that come to me when you say that. One is the question I like to ask men in general is like, what makes you come alive?
Ah, well, for me, it's practically anything.
Yeah. Yeah, but then
Sadly,
then take it one more step from that. Like, what makes you come alive within that? And then what makes you come alive within that? Okay, there's your thing, right? Like,
yeah.
like I have two boys that are 18 and 14, and they both love basketball. And then you start to do like that. They're like my experiment with this. Like I'm always trying to flesh out what they're most passionate about. When on YouTube, work with youth all the time. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not asking people what do you want to do when you grow up. It's like, who do you want to become?
That's the nail on the head. I think for so long we've been assigning success to position,
Yes.
right? So it's like, oh, someone could look miserable as hell. And then,
Yes.
oh, are you a CEO? Oh, it's amazing. You're doing well. But the guy looks, like he's got jaundice. He looks like he hasn't slept in days, you know.
Yes.
And it's like, oh no, he's a CEO. He's doing well, right? And I think
Right.
that paradigm definitely started to break down since the end of the 90s.
Hmm.
But I think it's still prevalent. And now it's kind of moved to, oh, how many followers do you have? Oh,
Yes.
he's doing well, right? Or
Hmm.
she's doing well because they have this independence or ability to sell these people. But as someone who's in social media, like I'm a professional. Like I have a job. Like I have a craft. I feel bad for some people who like they only do social media because I think it kind of makes you pander to audiences and people
And yeah,
and brands
approval
that you
and
probably wouldn't if you had some kind of independence away from, you know, being paid for posts and likes, right?
yes.
And so I
Right.
think a lot of people struggle with that. But I think it's tricky nowadays. It's really tricky. But passion and joy, again, those are things that are the real hallmarks of success. So when you talk about
Absolutely.
finding the things that your 18 and your 14-year-old enjoy, a lot of us think about, okay, well, how are they going to be perceived? Like, does he have a degree? Like, why does he need a degree? Does he have a great job? What's a great job? A great job is
Hmm.
something you enjoy. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
yeah, so like we've kind of we'd rather perceive things as great as to actually have them as great. It's kind of a
Yes.
weird dichotomy that we're living in right now. I think
Right.
we're starting to move away from that, maybe.
We are, because I mean, there's voices like yourself and myself too, where it's like we're trying to recalibrate that. We want people to look at those things differently, and they see that in in how we live our lives, right? So, you know, I was thinking about that earlier too, with my kind of path to being in Pilates and fitness now. I did my degree in social work, right? So I did my undergrad, did my master's, and I was working with youth at risk. And the whole time I was working with youth, I realized that I was having better conversation with these young people over the bench press in the gym than in a counseling setting, right? So after a while, it just came to a point where I did my personal trainer cert on the weekend, had someone who's mentoring me, and I just jumped because I figured, you know, I could fall back on that degree. But the reality is that I love fitness. I love hearing people's stories, and I love helping people get to their goals. So whether it's an emotional goal or a fitness goal, I'm still being true to myself in this path.
It's probably easier for you to relate to someone in a weight room than it would be in a traditional setting, right?
Of course, it's disarming, right? Like you're focusing on something else, and you just have a conversation. So that was 2002, right? I never look back, right? So,
Don't.
so, but yeah, that's it. So, and I love what you're saying about like the work that you're doing in the schools and being able to just talk and to use that gift. And one of your comments was about storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you just talk about your work with storytelling?
Okay, well, it's a big one because storytelling is everything for me. So basically, a while back, like I used to, you know, you want to be something. You want to be a journalist. I still want to be a lot of things, but I had to like really, I read a lot. And I had to really, and I think one of the things in the books that I read is I read exclusively self-development, quote unquote, self-help. I don't really have time for fiction. I'll read a couple biographies, but one of the things that, one of the key lessons was like, for me, was self-definition early, because I think like, you can call yourself a journalist, a reporter, a blah, 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 but does that permeate who you are completely? Like, I don't want to meet someone and say, hi, I'm a reporter for the Raptors, because that's not who I am when I'm with my mom. That's not who I am when I wake up first
No,
thing in the
that's
morning.
just it's a corner of who you are.
Yeah, it's a real small piece. And that too doesn't allow holistically for the whole thing to come together into one piece of information or knowledge that I can work forward with. I'm not the type of person that can have 18 things going on. I'm not the type of person that handles my email account well. I'm not a details person. So I
Yes.
need to synthesize information. I call it dumb it down. Shouts out to Lupe Fiasco and that hit song from back in the day, right? But like,
Yes.
I got to dumb it down for myself. And I think an easy way for me to dumb it down is to say like, sure, I'm a public speaker at schools. You know, I do live events. Work with the Raptors, work with the NBA, I work with kids, I work with youth organizations, I work with my friends. But there's some kind of unifying thing between all of that, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
the thing is, it's storytelling. I'm always engaged in passing on some type of observation that I've gleaned or that someone else has gleaned that I'm able to re-synthesize in a way that the audience I'm talking to now will be able to take.
Yes.
And so I find that like if we can kind of look at all the things we do and kind of come up with like a unifying theme behind it, what it's going to do is it's going to allow all the things you do to kind of make more sense. And it also kind of creates this like a roadmap. Because if I'm a storyteller, I kind of know what I have to do next, right? Like, but if I was
Yes.
a journalist, I'm like, well, maybe I need to do this gig or get this show or
Mm-hmm.
do this certain specific things. But knowing that I'm not a journalist, knowing that I'm not a reporter, knowing that I'm not whatever, knowing that I'm a storyteller, for me, it just allows me holistically, maybe a little spiritually, to know like what's next. And to me, it's always to tell the best story I can, the most compelling way that will help the most people. And
Yes.
so that kind of becomes this like North Star. So
Yep.
whenever you have to make another decision, I don't have to, okay, I got to put on my reporter hat, I got to put on my MBA hat, I got to put on my teaching hat, I got to put on this. No, it's like you already kind of know from the position that you're standing, like, is this going to help me become a better storyteller, which is kind of part of my life's purpose, life's reason for existing,
Yes.
end gain, end goal? Then everything else becomes easy. So I think like
Right.
to find a way to define yourself that works for all the hats you wear is
Yes.
kind of like a nice hack.
Absolutely. Just
Okay.
recently, I changed my business card title from Pilates coach, well, sports conditioning specialist, whatever, dropped everything and just put movement specialist.
Right? And it's counterintuitive because I think the culture we grew up in was like very letters behind your name, right?
Hmm.
Or the letters before your name,
Right,
doctor or Esquire or PhD
right.
or whatever. But I think for a certain segment of the population now kind of fallen out of tune with like institutional qualifications and
Yes.
stuff like that. Like now we're kind of realizing like I don't know, there's something else out there. There's a certain
Yeah.
je ne sais quoi, I don't know, that like
Can I take a shot at it?
yeah,
Now, what's happening in the Pilates community is there was a time when people would say they trained classically or they trained in a contemporary setting. And then there's people who Joseph Pilates taught, and then they taught, and then they taught. So people would say, I'm of this lineage. I'm a second generation teacher by this person. I learned by this person. And you look down your nose at someone who's trained by this person. And the tide is shifted to a point where now people don't care about your lineage. They don't care about who you trained under. They just are about helping people to move better, feel better, be pain free. So there's a shift from identifying yourself and having your worth be defined by who you trained by, who you studied by, the letters under your name, whatever, to who you actually are from the inside out.
yeah. I
You
think we're
know,
moving away holistically as an entire culture. We're moving
holistically.
away from just like having these like 6 or 7 institutions like the Princetons and Harvards
Right.
decide who is qualified to do what. And I think we're moving towards more a world where like first up, I think the thing that jumped out at me while you're saying that was like intersectionality. Because you
Yeah.
look at like the
Yep.
people who are really ahead of the game, they're speaking from their own personal experience. Like they have the traditional education, the lineage, but then what they're doing is they're taking that and they're pairing it with their very specific life experiences and their
Yes.
own, you know, traumas or their own
Hmm.
learnings, and they're fusing that and it's becoming deeply more personal. And I
Yes.
think that's kind of that je ne sais quoi where like once we start putting ourselves in our work, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
This is like before we was just this
Absolutely.
very textbook approach
No, there's
to
a
like
level of authenticity that's coming to our work now.
yeah, and I think with that, and again, this is part of my woo-woo nature. Like when you really put yourself in something,
Yes.
like there's another kind of juice that like you can get out of it. Like it's hard to explain, you know, in a
No,
in
I follow
words,
you.
but
No,
like
you got it.
from personal experience, I can tell you that like when you really invest your own personal story holistically, and you kind of try to understand how what you've learned has impacted you personally
Yes.
and pass that on to other people through personal stories.
Right.
Again, it's all about personal as opposed to like before it was just clinical.
Hmm.
I
Right.
think I think that's it's an area where we're going to grow a lot.
So what does the term vulnerability mean to you?
Oh, this word again. It's like the word right now. Well, you know what? It means everything right now because I think in terms of human group consciousness, it's probably the place where we have the most work to do.
Yes.
I think for me, vulnerability as a man in a patriarchal world, um, vulnerability for me, and as a black man in a white patriarchal world, vulnerability for me, I think for me personally, and vulnerability has been different things throughout my life. I think for me right now is allowing myself to feel passionately about the change that's happening without vilifying, for lack of a better word, white people and men. I think it's very easy for me and my emotions to, as a black person, see, there's it's like I don't know, it's tough because I see a lot of things in my own personal position, like people using racism to their advantage on both sides,
Right.
a bit, right? And then
Yep.
and I see people not willing to entertain the conversation at all, right? And sometimes it's because they think people are abusing the conversation.
They're leveraging it.
They're leveraging it, right? And so I think for me, because and one of the dangers for me is like I'm pretty good with words, and so I could get into a conversation with someone, especially a white person, who isn't as good with words as me, and they'll try to convey an idea or a message to me. And because I'm so good with words and arguing, and they're maybe not as adept in those skill sets, that I'll jump on them, especially in this time where I have the freedom and the room and the space to jump
In the
on them,
space. Yes. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the challenges for. I'm not speaking specifically from my position as a young black man, entering the Canadian corporate world. My issues aren't going to be the same as everybody else's, right? So
Right.
for me, I just got to watch myself because what I want in the end is not an environment where only black people and only young black men can be successful. I want an environment where everybody's successful. So I can't over leverage my story or what people have done. I think the real danger for me is to not be so sure of my word. I'm very dangerous when it comes to words. So if someone says something to me and they slip and they say the wrong word and they
You could
say
pounce on it.
the wrong thing, I'll pounce on them and I'll punish them, and publicly, privately, right? And I think that discourages a lot of conversation.
Right. Because you interpret as intimidating them or bullying them with your words, right?
Yeah. That's one of my issues, right?
Yeah.
And, so
Chris, I'm sure Christopher wants to know about your painting in a minute, so we'll hit that.
But so for me, being vulnerable is really shutting up sometimes, right? It's like letting someone say things that I may or may not agree with and not reacting. And that's one of my things. Like I think one of my big concerns for myself is like I'll see something I don't like and I'll run on Instagram like this person's look at this. You can't, and it's like that's me lashing out. That's me bigging up my chest at me. There's a lot of stuff that comes from that. So I think for me, vulnerability is, and again, it's specific to me, is about, not being so militant and so diligent with other people's words and just allowing people space to make a mistake and to correct and to allow that space to be there still. Like you say the wrong thing around me. I don't want people to be afraid to say the wrong thing around me.
We were talking about that yesterday, actually, with the lady that I had on, about the fact that in this ability, like this time that we're in, where everyone is so sensitive, still creating space for people to say something and it be wrong, get corrected on it being wrong, and have the room still to make that correction, instead of being afraid to really authentically be ourselves. Like, imagine if someone pounced on you every time you just went off like you just did a minute ago, and then they just jumped on every word. After a while, you think, okay, well, can I say this? And then we cease to be authentically ourselves. When we're not coming from a mean-spirited place, we should be able to just have that freedom to say something and know that we could be wrong with it, and then just make our pivots if we're wrong.
Yeah, and the real danger, like the thing how I learned this lesson was like just like studying a couple things, especially this incel movement and the Columbine shooters and stuff like that, was when you make it uncomfortable. And this is one of the dangers we have with white men right now, is if we keep making it uncomfortable for white men to speak their mind and their piece, even though we do have issues with how they're characterized, and there's obviously a history there. But if we keep making it, if we keep not allowing them to have space, what ends up happening, and we're seeing it play out in our culture, is it drives ignorance underground. And when ignorance is driven underground and it's not in the light, it festers. And a festering ignorance turns into things like the incel movement, like Tiki Torch, white nationalism, right? Because they feel so out of touch and removed from the world because we've kind of bullied their identity or their ignorance, right? It's ignorance.
Yes.
And so we've bullied their ignorance out, but they don't have, there's no space for them to say, yeah, I was ignorant. Let me say, let me have a conversation with you. No, it's a scorched earth policy. You're dead to us. We're drawing a line in the sand. This is part of America's problem right now. It's like I don't know how you're going to solve this problem when like half your country hates half your country, right? So it's like, so I think part of that is the real issue is where like, can we create space for other people to make mistakes and for white men to like, learn about like, oh, that's why that's wrong. That's why I can't say that. Not you're bad. And you're going to go to hell more because it's not really that at all. It's just like, let's learn how to really work this whole situation out together.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's when we talked about intersectionality earlier. That's where the fitness community has a great advantage because there's an intersection of fitness and racial equality where we can have those safe conversations in a different setting. And, and for myself, I say all the time, like I'm in the fitness business, I'm about celebrating progress. So if every single post was just slightly off color and then you do one that is correct and one is a bit more sensitive, I could celebrate the fact that you're making progress there instead of saying, well, what about those last 9 posts? Like give people the space to actually move and grow and make pivots instead of just like keeping them under thumb. Like my brother's saying there, like, making them feel oppressed. Like, and then we're oppressing the
Well,
oppressors.
What the funny thing is about that, Phil, is like, everyone feels oppressed.
Yeah, for sure.
Like if you really take stock of the situation that mankind is in right now, every single person feels oppressed. White people feel oppressed. Black people feel oppressed. Asian people feel oppressed. Brown people feel oppressed. Women feel oppressed. Men are now starting to feel oppressed. Right? It's like so. There's this. So if we can step back, we can say that there's this energy of oppression that exists within our society and our culture. And it may be built into our culture. It may be built into the institutions that we've created. It may be built into the assumptions that we've created. So I think like one of the key things is if we really start taking in how everyone feels oppressed. Because here's the thing about oppression, right? Oppression, when you acknowledge that you feel oppressed, it's a plea to the powers that be, right? To be like to recognize your situation. But I think one of the issues is like, we are all at the behest of a group that's removed from our culture and society. So like we're all on Instagram and we're all on Twitter and we're all on thing yelling at the other person on Instagram and Twitter and thing about the thing they did or said. But everybody's doing or saying these things in reaction to a power structure that exists. And the people that run the power structure and that, influence our lives so much aren't on Instagram and Twitter and thing. They're not. Right. So it's just us, the people who have the power to maybe in some way galvanize our efforts and fight back against this overarching structure that's pressing us down. But instead, what we've done is we kind of decided that we're going to play the moral high ground on the oppressor's apps against our allies.
Right.
So that's why I'm like, I really got to temper myself when I'm upset at people, who are posting ignorance when their ignorance is a result of a faulty education system, and their hatred is a result of a healthcare system that's putting them in a mind state that's not healthy for them. And so like it's easy to vilify people, but we're all symptoms of a larger system and structure.
Right. Yes, Marcia's comment there. So, posted the thought of the spectrum of grace the other day, and I've been digesting that, and you're reminding me of it. Spectrum of grace. Yeah, I gotta look that up.
I'm gonna look that up. I understand both words, but I don't know who unified the concept. I'm interested in finding out more about that.
We'll dive deep on that. And because I was gonna say too, along those same lines, I like this conversation because while you're a storyteller, I'm a listener. Like I love, and I was going to say that earlier when you're talking about storytelling, is that one of your quotes said as well, when you're sharing a story, you're provoking questions. And I like listening and to understand more about that, understand more of those questions, right? So let me just jump to what Marcia's saying.
Wow.
I think we're best when we see each other with the spectrum of grace. Adrian and Joe both said it. Okay. Cool.
I get what she's saying. I do get what she's saying.
Yeah. But Yeah, so like along those lines, that's where I come from. And when I listen to people's stories and I provoke them to tell their stories about themselves, I'm trying to understand people. And I think that when people come from a place of seeking to understand the other instead of trying to just impose their will upon the other, that's when we actually make progress.
Yeah, so it's trippy that you said, because like I've done this whole thing with story. So originally my stuff with youth was called storytelling,
Yes.
because I was really caught up in my story. And then once I got to like another level of observation, I would say, like story works completely. But then once you depersonalize story, then
Mhm.
shit gets crazy. Because
Yeah.
you realize, like, remember I said we're all oppressed.
Yes.
We're all telling the same story. So once you
Hmm.
depersonalize it, you step back at a certain level. You say, okay, like there are these certain like slots in our life, and they're just being filled automatically by the culture we live. And so we may be caught up in the personal story. We may see like the events and the colors of it, but
Through
there's
our
a
lens.
larger overarching structure to how all of our lives are being played out right now.
Yes.
And once we get to that story, right? Once we work through our own personal story at the front level and get to
Hmm.
like a higher story, you start to see like a lot of our struggles are being dictated to us. Like I remember, like I recently got to the point where like I don't buy things anymore. It's like I don't need, not to say I don't buy things, like, but to
Right.
the degree that I used to buy things
Hmm. Hmm.
is it's dramatically changed, and I'm not sure that my life has gotten worse because of it, right? And so there's so many things that we do by default, that we do by expectation, that we do by cultural assumption.
Yes.
That like, I got to get a new phone every 3 years. I got to get, I need
Right.
7 pairs of shoes at all
Right.
times.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of parts of our story that like, if we were to step back away from like the details, we would see
Mhm.
like, oh man, we were caught in a lot of loops.
Of course. And not only caught in a lot of loops, but then we get disconnected from our story, like you were saying earlier about being a storyteller. Like we have that one thing that catches us in terms of where we're moving towards. These things become distractions from us moving towards that one story about ourselves as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
definitely. I mean, I get caught up in almost anything when the NBA's on. I'm worried
Right.
about LeBron's son smoking weed. Oh my gosh, right? We can get
Yeah.
so caught, especially because like I think one of the big things is for us, we've been convinced that content is king, right? We spend
Yes.
all of our free moments watching screens.
Yep.
Like I was hanging out with someone the other day, they never put their phone down. Like if there was a, if we were watching TV,
Yeah.
scrolling the phone. I was
Yeah.
like, this is amazing. That's, I'm judging anyone because I do it too. I'm probably just unconscious of it when I'm doing it.
Right.
Because like I'm just definitely checking the NFL scores while I'm watching NBA, or the
Right.
NCAA scores when I'm watching the NFL. Like so,
Yeah.
but it's just like our minds, and two, it has an effect on our minds and how our minds work, right? So we're
Oh, of
constantly
course.
engaged in this type of low level storytelling from Real Housewives of Atlanta, which is my mom's favorite thing on the friggin' planet. I'm having the fight of fights with her on this
Yes.
one, but right, like we're just so addicted to watching, and maybe not listening, but definitely watching content.
Yes.
Hey, Sonny,
Funny. Can you tell the story of the painting behind this?
behind this, me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, so normally I have some really, really dope like stories about the art that I buy, but
Yes.
like this one is honestly just a struck to Boxing Day purchase.
There you go.
I
That
it wasn't.
counts. That's a
Yeah,
story.
yeah, it's a story. Like I've had some art that's had some crazy stories back in the day. But
Hmm.
this is probably one of the more generic stories, unfortunately. But the piece is super ungeneric. Like I don't know if you can see it, but like it looks like Snoopy's in this painting. With a
I
really,
see him.
yeah, right, like a really
Yeah.
jacked up Snoopy. But
Great.
yeah,
Have you named it too? Is it like what's the name of it?
Snoopy,
Snoopy. There you go. There you go. It's deep.
Snoopy. We'll give it a better name. We'll go psychedelic Snoopy.
Psychedelic Snoopy.
Yeah, he's having a
Feeling it.
trip.
There
Yeah.
you go. Nice.
So when am I getting my workout in?
Yeah, man, let's line that up. We can do that online, or we can like you're not far. You're downtown, so I'm in
Yeah,
Saga.
they closed down all the gyms down here, so I can't do nothing. But I got my ropes. I added this to my house.
There you go.
So at least I could do some pull-ups.
There you go. Yeah, man. We'll get some online stuff. I'll throw some stuff at you.
All right, cool.
We were saying earlier about the mindfulness. About the program that you're developing for kids with not mindfulness, but what was the word that you used?
Well, it's mindfulness and meditate and breath work as opposed
and
to
breath.
meditation.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I
Okay,
think
gotcha.
when I first got into it, I was like, yeah, everybody meditate, 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 meditate. Here's the funny thing about meditation, and it's a kind of a gross example, but like I'll give it to people. So like one of the ideas that people have about meditation is that you got to quiet your mind, which is a very high level thing, and for a North American, it's a super high level thing, right? Because we're so geared to like constantly using our minds. Hey, Alex. So what I started to do when I was working with the kids was I was shifting away from trying to convince young people and kids to meditate and instead focus on mindfulness. Because here's the thing about meditation that kind of discouraged me from teaching people meditation. First off, I'm not that good at it. There's the first thing that you should realize. If you're not that good at something,
evaluate.
Don't teach it. You know?
Yeah.
Secondly, meditation for me is kind of like the brain is like a bladder for thought. Okay?
Yes.
So if you haven't, so imagine you're however old you are now, and you had never peed before in your life. Imagine how full your bladder would be. So imagine how long you would have to stand in the bathroom and pee before your bladder was empty.
Right.
That's your brain. And I've spent 38 years thinking. So if I think that in 1 year, I'm going to get all because another thing you have to realize, your thoughts aren't yours. None of your thoughts are yours. You are literally just consciousness, just a blank slate.
Yes.
Your thoughts are programming that we've gotten from our kid, our name. Okay, I didn't create that, right? The language. English is, the child of Latin and German. It's existed for thousands of years. Like, I have nothing to do with that, right?
Right.
Most of the physical structures that I'm recognizing pre-existed me and my parents told me about them, right?
Right.
So it's like, all this stuff is before you.
Yes.
And then most of the emotional stuff is passive interactions with other people.
Right.
So you have all that backlog in your brain bladder that you've never in your life attempted to pee,
to release that,
to brain pee before.
Right.
So you think you're going to sit down on Thursday, never done this before, and reach Satori, and reach enlightenment, and reach a state of Zen, and there's no chance. You have no chance. You have no chance if you're being honest with yourself. So as I learned that, right, because like the thought, because when you start meditating, you realize these thoughts are insane. They're not mine. They can go anywhere. They can be about anything, and they're never new. I've read each and every one of them 1,000 times before. They're never new.
Yes.
So what I learned was like a good hack is breath work.
Okay.
Which is when you engage in recognizing physical sensations so much that by default, your brain just shuts up. Because there's so much information being processed by other neurons or the side of your brain that isn't associated with linguistics and language. Yes. So the other part of your brain is so overloaded with stimulus that it's really taking stuff in that there isn't enough blood, and it's going to shut down your language processing center. And once your language processing center shuts down, that's when you have access to all this type of brain energy that we don't ever use. And so for me, when I started doing it with the kids and with just my friends in my spare time, I noticed like I couldn't get anyone to tell me that their mood or anything changed. They're more frustrated after 30 minutes of meditation or 20 minutes of meditation. They're more frustrated and discouraged after meditation. Yeah. But if I get them to do literally 20 breaths of breath work, they're like, dude, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So it's like, all right, cool. So I've abandoned the meditation stuff now because obviously our culture, when you're watching, 17 episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine to get through your day, and you sit down right after that, you're going to hear Andy Samberg's voice in your head all day. Like you're going full boil. So, so just like, it was just been a hack for me that I've learned. Whereas if you could just really fill your mind with sensations coming from other places,
Yes.
then it'll shut down the language processing center, and then you have access to so much information and power and energy. It's trippy.
Wow. And that's funny because it is such a manageable task for any age that you can give them. Like you can't sit down a bunch of 15-year-old boys and say, okay, I want you guys to meditate for 20 minutes and go. Like
And the
they'll
odd thing is, I'm doing that with a bunch of 15-year-olds right now. Every Friday, shout out to Naz, I'm doing stuff with her classroom where we just get the kids love it. Like the weird thing is, I've tried meditation with everybody. I've been doing
yeah,
this meditation thing since I was like 22. I've tried to teach my friends. I've tried to do it with classes. The meditation does not kick off.
yeah,
But mindfulness and
breathing.
breath work,
Yeah,
we're jumping.
very cool. Very cool. So, in the 10 minutes we got left, I saw one of the comments about you were talking about the NBA and the intersection with race and how they did last season. The question I have for you right now is what's going to happen next season with on the racial consciousness and equity and all that stuff? Like, how do you feel that message is going to come across? Like, do you feel like they're going to like, okay, we ticked the box last year, or do you think they're still going to be as strong on that front? What's your personal thoughts on where it's going?
Okay, so I've been over the last little bit, I've been changing in my mind in how I work because I also come from, you know, the mind state of I don't trust corporations and, you know, all the race stuff that comes with it. So I've been doing a really good job of monitoring my mind and how I think about things, and I don't want to be discouraged by what's happening. First thing I'll say is the NBA. I'm not talking about the owners. I'm not talking about the owners because the owners are obviously some of the richest people on the face of planet Earth, that we don't know what their personal leanings are. And we found out when we were doing the research on who was donating to who. I thought it really doesn't matter in the United States. Biden and Trump are the same thing. I don't know why everyone thinks it's different. But anyways, outside of the ownership, I do feel like, and I'm very spoiled and fortunate, I do feel like the NBA is probably the best organization that I could work for. I don't know of an organization, and again, this is more specifically to my life story and my life, but I mean, in North America, especially towards groups that aren't us, nothing has done a larger job of normalizing the image of Black people in North America than sport.
Agree.
Right?
Right.
Like, we would still be sharecroppers if sport didn't exist. Our skills economically have helped the country and helped ourselves. So sports always held a special place. My entire life is built around sports. So sports obviously something very important to me. I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in if sport wasn't around, or at least that's what I personally believe. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. But I will say that the NBA, underneath ownership, again, I can always make that description. Although Toronto's got great ownership,
Yes.
but like you know, there's some teams out there
Right.
who don't have the same ownership.
Right.
You know, shout out to LA and Toronto and the Dallas Mavericks and the Golden State Warriors, because I know what your owners are like. But outside of that, when I look at a guy like David Stern and I look at a guy like Adam Silver, I see respectable human beings. I see real, again, they're capitalists, and I think capitalism has served humanity tremendously. I think its day is coming to an end, hopefully, as we enter Aquarius, and we can find more newer ways of governing and sharing wealth. But I do believe that Adam Silver and David Stern have done tremendous things for the Black community. You know, sure, sports exploits our physical attributes, but it's done so much. You think about the generational wealth that the NBA has been able to infuse into the Black community. And at the same time, I look at the NBA as a leader. You think about like when the NBA shut down, that's when you knew coronavirus was serious, right? And the NBA was the one who set the golden standard with the bubble, right? And that's and like people more talk about NBA players than they do about any other type of celebrity, right? Like it's culture right now.
It is culture.
So I don't think they dropped this race thing. I know because I'm inside conversations, fortunately, working with the league and working with the league sponsors, that I know that it's not going to go away from the workload that I've been gifted with.
Gifted.
But at the same time, a repeated message does fall on deaf ears.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be key how they do it. Don't turn the NBA into the civil rights movement, right? Because one, I think, and this is where I differ from a lot of people. Not that I differ, but I listen to people smarter than me, so I kind of get this perspective. Is like, don't make it too much of one thing. Like, don't alienate the other. Like, I think that's the danger that we keep running into. Is like we find something we like, and we're like, okay, alienate the other now.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need them. It's like we need everybody, man.
Right,
There's going to be a point where we need Donald Trump. You know, where we need Pence and the rest of them. Like, we need everybody. Like, no one's here on accident. So I think we just gotta be really careful of just, recognizing that like everyone has a part to play.
Yes, and not oppressing anybody.
Yeah, and I think the NBA is gonna do that. And white people like basketball. China likes basketball. Like, you know what I'm saying? India, basketball's booming in India. Africa's got a league. Like, you look at the NBA on the globe.
Yes.
I'm sure we had our stuff with Daryl Morey in China last year, but they let the NBA back in. And that's a strange situation, by the way, just to say it.
Yeah.
China letting the NBA back in. All right, but they brought the NBA back in. You look at the NBA in India, it's growing. You look at NBA Africa, it's got a league, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I think NBA is good for the planet. Like, I mean, FIFA hasn't been. Soccer's definitely, as much as soccer should be one of the most well-integrated sports, but it's just they haven't been able to move the needle in terms of making people less agitated with seeing black people on the field. But for some reason, basketball's been able to do it.
Right. Yeah. Great insight, man. So good. Okay, man, it's been so good talking with you, man. I'm really glad that we're able to
I talk a lot, man. I had a lot of practice.
It's so good. Yeah, man. So we are at 57. That just flew by. But yeah, I'm gonna reach out to you. We'll get a workout in, man. Let's line that up.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have you come back on and just keep these conversations going. This is really good.
Let me know, man. I'm not doing much these days. Maybe I'll be out of town. Who knows? Fingers crossed. Might be in Tampa. Who knows?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. We didn't even talk about that, but next time.